Okay, so we're gonna do something a little different today on Game Story Basics. Usually I do more like kind of college lecture style things, but today we're gonna interview another narrative person who can then reveal all the lies that I've been telling on this channel. So it's with some trepidation that I will introduce our guest, Rich Dansky, who has a long resume that I don't want to do an injustice to, so I'll ask him to introduce himself. But first, I'll just say the part that he is certainly too humble to say, which is that Rich is really sort of one of the prime people that put together the game narrative community in North America, certainly, and some would say globally. Writers are an antisocial lot. We're not given to hanging out and socializing. But maybe because of his background in another gaming industry that he can tell us about, maybe he understood the value and the importance of that community. So very early on, he organized the game narrative community. And I think he's also sort of, as weird as it is to say in this day and age, been what I would call a moral leader in the sense of creating a culture among game narrative people of respecting differences, allowing people to be expressive and crazy, but still keeping some pretty rock hard standards about what is acceptable behavior and what's not. And I always, when a young narrative developer is going to go to their first GDC, and I'm not going to be there, which is usually, I always tell them if you get into trouble or you need help, or just if you want to be able to meet other game narrative people easily, look up Rich Dansky. He's the person that you want to talk to. So with no further ado, hi, Rich. Welcome to Game Story Basics.
Hello. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the very kind words. Very much appreciate them.
Why don't you tell us about your long and impressive highlight reel?
Okay. So my name is Rich Dansky. I've been writing, designing, narrative directing, and otherwise working on video games since 1999 when I joined Red Storm Entertainment. For most of that time, I was the central Clancy writer for Ubisoft, working primarily on the various Tom Clancy franchise games, but also things like Might and Magic and Far Cry, and I did a little Assassin's Creed at one point, and whatever else they needed me to do. And I was very lucky in that I got to work with a whole lot of teams on a whole lot of projects and a whole lot of studios, and really have this incredibly broad and exciting experience in that role. In 2022, I wrapped up my time at Ubi, went to join Crytek on Hunt Showdown for a couple years, and then I spent the last 6 months at Romero Games as the narrative director. Prior to all that, I was in the tabletop role-playing industry and also the LARP industry. Two are sort of married. And if you go to a nightclub or a coffee house or something and you run into people who are pretending to be vampires, there is a non-zero chance that is my fault. I also write fiction, among other things, and I've published 8 novels and 2 short story collections with another novel on the way. And later this year, my first nonfiction book, The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving an Industry That Hates You, is coming out. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, congrats on that. And we will definitely talk about that later, after we have first established with our viewers that you actually know what you're talking about.
Oh, that's going to be tricky.
Yeah. Well, who knows? I mean, story. Who knows? Don't they just push a button and have a computer do all that now?
Bite your tongue.
Yeah, I know. That's an old joke, but it's actually become more topical recently. Let's just start with a couple of real basic story stuff for maybe people who are just thinking of getting into game narrative or trying to, or people who've just gotten in and they're sort of in the sponge phase where they're trying to absorb as much info as they can. So I would say if you had to take all your many learnings about the craft of writing games and condense it down to like 3 bullet points, what would those bullet points be?
I think the 3 that are most core to the experience are: 1, it is not our story, it is the player's story, and we should write accordingly. 2, we write to what I call the player-shaped hole, the space in the game narrative the player fills and picks up and then turns into story through their actions. And so we write to the possibility of what the player might and will do, as opposed to trying to control the experience from on high. And 3, words are the cheapest fix until they're suddenly the most expensive. And I call that Dansky's first law of game writing. And Lord Almighty, I've seen it true so many times.
A follow on of all three of those bullet points would be the need to be flexible. As a storyteller, you need to have some kind of a plan, not just in terms of production, but in terms of like what is the experience that I want people to have? What kinds of reactions am I hoping to evoke? And at the same time, you have to be willing to cut any particular aspect of your plan and modify it and adapt on the fly. So, do you agree that that's a dichotomy? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I think in a weird way, it's actually kind of a synergy. You just have to take the long way around. I tell writers who work for me, one, we work in Legos, not in gems, which is to say, we pop stuff in, we pop it out, we try and find the best fit. Nothing that we do is perfect and precious the moment we create it. It has to be the appropriate thing for what the game needs, what the player's experience is going to be. And so we should learn to and take joy in and take pleasure in the challenge of changing and rearranging and finding the best fit and being able to, if circumstances change, come up with a fix that maintains the meaning that we wanted, the character development that we wanted, even if a level gets cut or a scene changes or a puzzle changes or things like that. And so that challenge is honestly one of the things I find often most interesting in what we do. And at the same time, I tell people that we write in ink, not blood. And it is really easy to go head down and find what you think is the absolute best solution to any narrative problem and get so invested in that if feedback comes back that says, hey, can you change this thing? Hey, this isn't quite working. Hey, we have to make a change. That you lock up, you freeze. But this was the optimum solution. And it's, I've thought of this. And no, we don't write in blood. We shouldn't put that much of ourselves. We shouldn't invest that much in every word, because what we're doing is part of a collaborative exercise, and our work goes towards the greater goal of the player experience. So write in ink, not blood. Don't get married to your words. Be willing to pull back and say, okay, this was a great idea. It's not the right idea. What can I do instead?
But at the same time, it's ink and not pencil, which I'm gonna drag this analogy out to say that I'm guessing that you also would not advise to just roll over on everything. Just be like, just tell me what it is and I'll cut it. Would you say
Yes,
that
and
that's
that's
the
why I
case?
say ink and not pencil.
Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the things that writers don't do a great job of in our industry, and this is something I hammer on continuously in the book, is we do a less than great job of advocating for our own work and why it is important and how it benefits the game. And I am a big fan of getting out in front of that, about being proactive, about driving the discussion. Here's what this does. Here's how this benefits the game as a whole. If we have this scene, we can do these other things. And so explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then flipping that and say, okay, you want to cut this scene, we're going to need these three other things, and we're going to need to re-record these 12 actors, and it's going to cost us this much money. And speaking to producers and producerees, that's a great way to defend your work and advocate for it. And I don't even like the word defend. I say advocate is a better word there. You need to recognize that your work has value. You need to be able to communicate that value so that it's a real choice. It has to be a considered choice on the part of others if they want to make changes. At the same time, you can't fight to the death on every single issue. You can't pick every hill to die on. But if there's something that's valuable, if there's something that's important, then you absolutely should go to bat for it. And frankly, if possible, get out in front of it. If you can see the possibility of a conversation happening, drive that conversation instead.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In fact, I think it's important enough that I'm gonna, in a way, sort of expand on it a little bit, just to say that I found a lot of game teams treat the writer like they're an inherently defensive, protective, precious developer, whereas everybody else is so open to collaboration. One of the results is that some writers are then afraid to fight for anything, like you were saying, and become not good advocates for their stuff. And I just wanted to highlight the point that you made, because I found it to be true as well. I think it's really smart, is to sort of just make everything like a formula or a calculation, to to try to remove the emotion from it and just say, well, this is what this idea does. And if you can come up with an idea that achieves these three things with the same amount of budget, then let's use your idea.
Yeah. And part of that is honestly that there's not a great understanding of what writing does. And so there's not a lot of great respect for it. Everybody writes emails, they think they can write. And they can't write at a professional level, which is what we're doing. And this is the equivalent of making a grilled cheese sandwich and thinking you can walk into a Michelin star restaurant, or at least a good restaurant, and just take over behind the spatula there. And one of the things we have to do that we're not good at is advocate for ourselves, is educate people. And one of the things I try and do with all the teams that I'm on is try to get people on board with the storytelling so they can see the thought goes into it. So they can see it's not just typing. So I will do story time with the teams. I will say, hey, here's an element of our story. Gather around. I'm going to tell you all about it. You can see why it's cool. And they see how the pieces fit together. One of the issues I've run across consistently during my career, honestly, is that so much of game dev is done one chunk at a time and things are looked at in isolation.
Yeah.
While we as writers have to look at the gestalt, we have to look at the whole thing. And so when a piece over here gets moved, we're the ones who understand that it makes a dozen changes over here. And we have to refrain from going, a dozen changes. Instead say, hey, do you realize here are the knock-on effects? But at the same time, we need to build the understanding that this is our wheelhouse. This is what we understand. We are not being precious. We are not being uncooperative. We are looking out for the greater whole. This is not about us. This is about the game.
And your point about sort of communicating with the team, doing story time and stuff like that kind of feeds into another thing I wanted to say. In the same vein of reducing vast amounts of experience down to 3 bullet points, what would you say if you had to sort of create 3 bullet points about everything that you think is important or have learned about collaboration in game narrative?
Okay. I would say 1, learn how to speak to people in their language. You can't expect non-writers to understand the professional language of writing, and trying to communicate stuff using that jargon, using that implied understanding is going to go nowhere. You need to learn to frame things in the way that people understand. 2, you need to be open to ideas, but not roll over. At the same time, if you say no, it should always be no because. And you need to always explain why you are saying this is a good idea, but it doesn't fit what we're doing now because of this, this, and this. There was a wonderful designer I worked with at Red Storm, and he was just absolutely fantastic as a designer, but someone would come to him with an idea and he would say no. And they would take a deep breath, and then he would explain why the no wouldn't work, but everyone had shut off after the no. And that was a very powerful lesson to me going forward. So you have to be willing to be gentle, be open, don't be universal, curate the content, but don't slam the door. Be generous with your listening and with your explanations. And is that 2 bullet points, 3 or 4?
I thought we had 3 there, but I mean, if you've got more,
extra bullet point here. Yes, bonus bullet point, which is that you need to teach other departments that writing is a discipline. There is this misunderstanding that the writer sits down and words come out as fast as they can type, and that it is perfect first draft. And this is obviously not the case. Anybody who's done any professional writing knows that the job involves research and getting stuck for a while and staring off into space, and sometimes going down an internet rabbit hole to do some research, hoping to get inspired, and multiple drafts and iteration and polish and things like that. And that's a process that's very alien to people because, again, they don't understand writing. They don't understand what the craft requires. They think it's just typing. And so that needs to be communicated, that you need to educate people about what your needs are, and whether that's good feedback, actionable feedback, or enough time to do multiple drafts, or timely feedback, or good understanding of the technical limitations. There's a game I worked on where I found out halfway through the writing process we could only have 3 voices in a level. And I had written scenes that had many more than 3 voices in a level because it was that kind of game story. And so going and seeking out that stuff and letting them know what you need to do your job, whether it is information, whether it is time, whether it is feedback, all of that is absolutely vital.
It sounds like, in addition to delivering a major feature of the game, another part of the job of a game narrative person is educating the rest of the team and getting their teacher hat on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're kind of outsiders in a lot of ways. Writing, despite the heyday of the text adventures back in the day when it was all writing on a certain level, we've always been sort of the caboose on the train. And for a long time, the designer did the writing because, hey, it was words and they wrote documents so they could write the story too. And there has never been a real understanding, I think, at most game studios or across the industry of what it takes to actually do good writing. And so the industry is not set up to produce good writing by and large. And then the writing comes out less polished than the rest of the game, perhaps. And they turn and say, see, we told you writing's terrible.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that it comes from somewhere.
Yes.
And I mean, you can have the best producer in the world and you can set up a schedule with this much time to write and revise. But if level design slips by a week and mission design slips by 2 weeks and puzzle design slips by a week, all of a sudden that's 4 weeks of the writing time that has been chewed up because the back end of the writing time is locked into when you're going to the studio, and that's expensive and that's locked in, and you can't move that because the actors might have other gigs and you might not be able to get the studio time. And so the writing time squish. So you have less and less and less time to do it, less and less time to iterate, and less time for rounds of feedback. And then on top of that, if you have folks who are not speedy about feedback, even more of that time gets chewed up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, okay, I'm going to tell a tale out of school here, but I can mention some pretty high profile games I worked on where we put first draft dialogue in a game because I got so crunched from other things happening in the schedule that there was just time for one draft.
Yeah.
And I write a really good first draft, but I'd rather do a second draft and probably a third and a fourth.
I won't lie. There's a couple games out there where there's dialogue in it that I wrote in the VO studio.
You're familiar with the big cinematic at the beginning of The Division, where Fei Lao is talking to Benitez, and he says to her, "I don't want to throw your people to the wolves," and she says, "Captain, we are the wolves."
Yeah,
and
it's a great moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I wrote that in the studio as the actors were getting into their mocap suits, and we had done like 20 iterations of that cinematic. Half of them in the cab as I was on the way over to the studio, talking with people in Sweden, and just like, okay, got to do it. This is it. Boom.
Right.
And found gold at that last minute. But
another thing I always try to convey to the team is that even the voiceover or the performance capture process also has this thing that comes after it called LOC. So that pushes it up even further. And that basically every day that passes during that phase of game development, every change becomes infinitely more expensive. The only saving grace of that period is that you can tell him to go talk to the executive producer. Well, I just convince the executive producer that your idea is worth spending $15,000 and we will get right on it.
15,000?
Well, I'm being, it depends on what point of how far into this process we are. That's early. One thing I referenced in your intro is that you built the game narrative community. You were one of the primary people who sort of coalesced, let's put it that way, the game narrative community. I don't want to seem to deny credit to anyone else involved, but I'm just curious, given that writers tend to be antisocial people who'd rather sit in a dark room on a Saturday night and type on their keyboard, what was that like? Were there any challenges? Were there any surprises to you in putting all that together?
I really saw the need very early on in my career. And I realized that everybody else on the team had someone to talk to. They had other people who spoke their professional language, who understood their challenges, who could give them feedback on a technical and a professional level. And at that point, if studios had writers, they had one. And there was no one to talk to. And you couldn't talk to folks at other studios because of NDAs. And so that told me there was a real need. And so I felt that I should do what I could to try and build a place of community. And part of that was getting together with some other great folks like Wendy Despain and Chris Bateman and helping found the IGDA Game Writers SIG. Part of that was Susan O'Connor founded the Game Writers Conference in Austin that became Austin GDC and 12 other titles before they shipped it off to become the Narrative Summit at regular GDC. And I was lucky enough to be added to the board of that very early, and then take over the leadership of the student narrative competition, which is something that is incredibly important to me because it's important to foster young talent, and not just from the very few top schools, but from as broad a range of schools as possible, and get those students on stage at the big conference in front of people who will be doing hiring, in front of people who will be their professional peers, and do that. And so, but also I did the narrative roundtables at GDC. I've been doing those since I think 2007, pretty much every year. Again, because there needed to be a place for us to talk to each other professionally. There needed to be a place where we could say, you understand what I am going through, help. Or you understand what I am going through, here's what I've learned. Please take this and run with it. And it made a central place, a community. And we have built on that and these other things. Andy Walsh has done amazing work with the Writers Guild of Great Britain and organizing writers over there. And we've built something. We've built a community, and we reinforce it every chance we get. And I'm proud and humble of the fact that I have played a part in this, whether it has been working at the Game Narrative Summit or curating the narrative track at East Coast Game Conference, or certain other things that I do that we can't talk about in a public forum, or mentoring people, or offering my thoughts and wisdom, using the term wisdom very, very carefully, on LinkedIn twice a week on the topic of game narrative. And so the community is really important to me, and I'm happy that I can help generate and help sustain it and bring people to a better place professionally. And this is going to sound really, really crazy, but this has been my calling for a quarter of a century. This has been my professional life. This has been what matters to me to do. And it has been an honor and a pleasure and a challenge to see where we have gotten to from where we started, to bring people along, to see the community develop and expand. And when I hang up the keyboard, if I can butcher that metaphor, this is something that I'm really going to look back on with pride and say, hey, I contributed to the craft. I made people's lives better. And that's what I'm going to take with me beyond the last game I write.
I completely agree with you it's a deeply important thing, because you're right. I think game narrative, not always, not automatically, but many times being the writer or the narrative person on the team is a very lonely post. I came out of storyboarding where you were always a member of a 12-person storyboard team. Well, it wasn't always 12, but you know what I mean? It was a team, and you were one of several. And then I was very fortunate. My first game writing experiences both were at BioWare, where I was with a team of about 4 to 5 writers per project. But I know a lot of people, they get hired, they get their first gig, they're like, I made it, I'm in game development. And then they join a team of people who have no idea what they do. And they're the only one that does it. And there's, as you said, no one to talk. I've had, and I'm sure you have as well, I've had a number of developers reach out to me who are actually, they're working professionals who go, I have nobody to ask questions. Can I ask you some questions? I have nobody to ask these questions to. So I think your instinct there was very, very spot on.
Thank you. Yeah, this is why I wrote the book as well, honestly, because I looked around from 20 plus years in, and said, there is a ton of excellent work out there about how to write for games. There is very little about how to be a game writer, and nobody teaches you that. They can teach you how to write barks. They can teach you how to write dialogue. They can teach you the craft, but there's nothing out there really to teach you how to do the day-to-day. And that was something that I saw was a glaring and painful need for people in our craft. And I don't think I have all the answers, but I think I've got some answers and some useful answers and some things that can start some conversations. And I want to build that communal knowledge that we don't have of how to do the job, of how to get your work in front of people properly, of how to advocate for yourself, of how to build bridges, of how to get your words to the player in the best way possible. And this book, if that can be the first brick that gets laid in the edifice, I will be very, very happy. I don't expect it to be the complete edifice. I want it to be a starter. And that is my hope and my goal for it and why I did it. But I think there needs to be a start. And I mean, at this point, I'm a pretty good guy to say it. Pretty good guy.
You're well positioned. Yeah.
Yeah. I have indeed seen some shit, as they say.
Yes, and you remember it all, so you're able to talk about it. Well, that's great. I mean, you transitioned beautifully into the book. In fact, you gave just such a good encapsulation of why you wrote it and what it is that I'm almost like, oh, what do I ask now? So let's start with the most obvious one. When does your book come out?
It comes out end of August of this year,
and
I am thrilled that it is hitting shelves. I tell people this is a book that I have been writing for 25 years and typed for 6 months. And it has, I'm very happy to say, resonated with a lot of the folks who were beta readers of it, folks whom I respect immensely in the professional community. And so I'm hopeful that this is something that's going to be of value to everyone. It's something that people can pick up and turn around and use. And there's a lot of stories I could have told that were very funny, perhaps, or alternately terrifying, that I didn't tell in the book because there was no positive lesson to be gained from them. There was no benefit from laying that out there. There was nothing to be learned from those other than, okay, don't do that again.
Right.
And what I did,
and just pure entertainment.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be saved for the launch party. So come back to North Carolina for that. August 27th at Yonder Bar in Hillsborough. Come on.
That's it for part 1 of my interview with Rich Dansky. But join us for part 2. There's lots of other super interesting game narrative stuff to talk about still.